Hello, Darren. Welcome to Talking Bollocks.
Well, HHS, do we get to call you that, or are you Howard to everybody?
You can call me what you like, mate. I don't care.
Okay, well, if I can start with a compliment here, congrats on 10 years of your show.
Oh,
Congrats
thank you.
on keeping Motorhead's legacy alive.
Oh, thank you.
Motorhead has better legacy management than Van Halen. We cannot deny that one. And thanks for being you, Howard.
Oh, that's that. All these compliments. I'm British, so I'm uncomfortable with compliments, as I'm sure you're aware.
Mm.
Um, and if at any point that I say, look, when you're over here, look me up, and you can crash at my place, what I actually mean is, no, you can't. Um,
Correct. There's this to rudely interrupt you. I think this was Larry David or Steve Martin. Some other comedy person was going to stay at their house, and I think it was Steve Martin. He goes, "How long are you going to stay here?" And the guy goes, 2 or 3 days. He goes, two. It's like that.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah. So look, we've been kind of put together by a mutual friend in the metal world, good old DX Ferris.
oh
Um,
yeah,
Shout out to the man with the well, with
Talking
the deep
Slayer.
with the deepest Slayer voice out there. Um, and he told me about you, and I was like, well, that sounds like one interesting dude and one interesting product and a project. And I'm obviously talking about the Dave Lee Roth book, who is a complete conundrum to me. So, yeah, I like. How did you get started on this? Is it something that you've been, just tell me about it, man.
Well, the earlier mentioned DX Ferris, hell of an author. He's probably writing 3 books right now, and they're all going to be great beyond the podcast.
Yeah.
Kudos to that guy for being a great creative. But this David Lee Roth book kind of started as a joke because did you have? I know he was broadcast in the UK, but not in a mainstream way. Did you have Howard Stern over there?
No.
Okay, Howard Stern is this just morning kind of shock jock radio guy that now is on Sirius XM, and
Yeah, yeah.
a
No,
lot of
I'm
his
aware of who he is, and obviously, the movie Private Parts, it's fucking
yes,
great, love it, and I'm aware, and obviously, now we live. Now I was going to say now we live in the world with the internet. It's been around quite a while, but
right.
there's loads of clips and all the rest of it.
Oh,
And so yeah, for those UK listeners who haven't seen Howard Stern, go check him out, YouTube him, whatever. But yeah, he's
a
kind of
lot of our
he
a
kind of
lot of
sort
our
of started the way for a lot of that kind of radio.
For sure. And a lot of our favorite bands are still using him as the way to premiere their new stuff. Like the Cult's new tour, I believe, is being announced this week through Howard Stern, and Kiss did theirs that way, and Sammy Hagar unveiled his tour that way. So I grew up a big fan being on Long Island, New York, where he was originally from. And his line of questioning, where you would just not always ask the things you were supposed to ask in the interviews. So I had a while where I was just throwing into all my interviews, like, so who's the best lead singer of all time in Van Halen, or who's the best lead singer? And I was doing that around the same time that I was coincidentally interviewing all these people who had worked with Roth. And I was always super intrigued by Roth and Van Halen and getting all these stories. And then I realized I had dozens of interviews and dozens of hijacked interview questions inserted in, including Lincoln Park with Matt Pinfield. And I kind of realized, oh, I'll write a book. And I sent it to every literary agent I could find. And all it takes is one to believe in it.
Yeah.
I sent it to one, and he goes, great, great, great. But I need a pitch, and it has to have these things. And that's what literary agents usually tell writers who they want to get to go away, because
Yeah.
no one's going to put free time into writing 30 pages anytime soon. Well, I did it within 2 days. He made me revise a couple of things, gave it back to him, and then he goes, okay. And within 3 days, he sold it. And then it was oh, now I have to write this.
That is hella cool though. I mean, that is just and I love that concept as well. It's like that's exactly how I would work. It's like I'm not going to write this book. No way. But what I am going to do is I'm going to I'm going to pitch for it, and if somebody is willing to publish it, well then I'll write it.
Yeah. So before I wrote the book, I did have the Steve Vai, the Billy Sheehan. I had some of the key ones, but then The book that I started writing isn't necessarily the way that it ended in this current state. And then what I now know, because I turned in my manuscript of 14, 15 months ago, that's how painfully slow the publishing industry is. By the time I write my next book, you might have another 200 or 300 episodes of your podcast out. It's that slow. So the thing is, after I turned in the book, all these other Dave insiders kind of came to me and was like, damn it, I could easily do another 40,
Um,
50,000 words in this. So, never say never on an expanded edition in the future as Dave's stories progress and we're allowed to talk about more of the stuff from behind the scenes.
so what you're saying is that there might be a whole, well, and not an extended edition. It sounds like you could even do another book.
I don't think another book itself is fully justified because then you're really, really going at the scraps. Like one
Yeah.
of my favorite memoirs when I was a much younger man was Don Rickles' memoir. And then the second book is horrendous because they clearly did everything, they said everything. So the second book was him writing to historical figures, him doing roast comedy at like,
Oh,
dear Abraham Lincoln, and you go, oh man, so that was
oh dear.
clearly a two-book deal, and you didn't think that there was going to be a second book. I don't want that.
Yeah,
But
that's terrible. That is
but
that is
like
absolutely terrible.
but putting another 30 to 50,000 words on top of what it is and correcting some of the things, one of my ideas is one of my insiders that I befriended after writing the book, I'd want to give it to him and have it mark it up as a copy editor and it just be scans of those pages. So he writes in carrots, not true, I was in the room,
Right.
half true. I would love that so much, but hey, I'm not the only
Yeah.
maker.
The funny thing is, as I've learned over the years, it's you can have you can have like three or four people. Well, it's like any story, isn't it? You have three or four people in the room. Three or four people remember it three or four different ways, and as clear as I might think my memory is, somebody else will pitch in with a like an added detail, and you're like, yeah, did that happen? Or maybe I've left that out. It's as the years go by and memories get foggier and foggier, and I'm
Yeah.
definitely sure that there's well, let's say there's three sides to every story, isn't there? There's your side,
with,
there's my
with Van
side, and there's the
Halen,
truth.
with Van Halen, there's usually 5 to 10 sides to every story because
Yeah,
you get the Dave or whoever was singing in the band perspective, you get the Eddie slash Alex perspective, you get the Michael Anthony perspective, which is always like the nice, pleasant, reserved, not flinging mud at anyone. You go, oh, I like that guy perspective.
yeah,
Whoever was managing them, whoever Dave's assistant was at the time's perspective, whoever the accountant, whoever the record company, it
yeah,
there that's one of the themes of this book that Dave's been telling some of these stories for decades and he changes it over time and then
yeah.
the other people in the room go, no, that's not what happened.
Well, what happens is over time, I know this because, like, I've got my own one man show about all my years in the business, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I've spent 25 years being a stand-up comedian, so
Right.
I willingly embellish some of the stories and just tweak them here and there because over the years you don't remember the event, you remember the story, you know,
Oh,
and
that's deep. That is deep. I never thought of it that way before, Howard.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Well, speaking as somebody who almost I do turn my stories not into scripts, but I perform them. It's a one man show, so it actually becomes more about the stuff because ultimately, over the years, you want the story to work whenever you're telling it, whether it's on stage or it's just everything I'm doing. I've told to people over the years, but you never want it to fall flat or anything like that. So you tweak things and sometimes genuinely when I'm doing this on stage, I remember stuff that I'd forgotten. That's literally like over 30 years old, and all of a sudden I remember this like tiny little detail where I go, shit, I've been telling this story all these years without that detail in it.
I am unfortunately the same way. Right before this interview, I texted an old friend of mine I recently connected with a freestyle rap lyric that he did over 20 years ago that I've no idea why I just remembered that out of nowhere. Yet,
Wow.
if you went, hey, so Darren, where's that gift card? I would go, oh, oops.
And so I mean, when you're as you say, Dave has been telling these stories. Did you get a chance to speak to Dave at all? Did you kind of, or has this all been done as a kind of investigative following the breadcrumbs?
So originally, I thought that he was going to participate in the book. And the way that Team Dave operates is no is silence. He has this one lady who is his manager slash accountant slash assistant slash travel buddy slash everything. And everything goes through her. And you trust that it all gets filtered through to Dave. But Dave, last time I checked, no cell phone, not really an email guy, and that's by choice because he is a savvy gentleman. You just send it to her, and then if they're interested, you hear back.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that any day now I could hear back these years later. Most likely not. So my one conversation with Dave was '03. It was a phoner, and that's in chapter 1 of the book. But since he didn't participate, well, I'm going to speak to family members and bandmates and collaborators and assistants and people we've worked with. So the book has people from the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, 10s, 20s, and even a cousin of his who talked about life before the 70s. So I think it gives all perspectives of Dave pre Van Halen, during Van Halen, solo, back to Van Halen, solo.
Wow. I mean, that is really extensive research. And
Obsessive, yes.
yeah, but these ultimately, I know how you feel. There is all of this stuff out there, and it deserves to be heard. It deserves to be collected and put in one place as a record. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
absolutely. And I think that you being the Motorhead guy, you get it on a different level because the average person, when they hear Motorhead, they just go, okay, Lemmy, Ace of Spades, and that's it. They don't think about the other songs that charted, how many bands Motorhead inspired, how many bands covered Motorhead, all the side and offshoot bands, your Fastways and Girls School, and Lemmy duetting with Doro and all these people. You could get as deep as you want, or you can just go, yeah, Ace of Spades, Lemmy, Guy at the Rainbow.
Yeah.
You could do those two paths. But I really admire that Motorhead, how many posthumous products and releases they've had since Lemmy has passed. There's still new stuff coming out, and it's pretty interesting. And the surviving members do press and they talk about Lemmy. And then you compare it to Van Halen, and you go, there's only been a handful of Alex Van Halen interviews in the last 10 years. There's only been a handful of Dave interviews in the last 5 years. And Michael Anthony and Sammy Hagar, they do interviews, but it's not usually pro Van Halen or pro Dave. And then meanwhile, we don't know what's in the vaults. We don't know if there's ever going to be a tribute show, a tribute thing ever. The Van Halen website now has 3 postings on it last time I checked. One is to congratulate Alex for getting into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame. One is to promote the box set, and one is Alex's "We Miss You, Ed" Instagram post. And that's it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the way things are going, um, I think that people who are a lot younger than us, when they hear the name Van Halen, they're going to think that they were a small band, and they're going to think that Motorhead, Joan Jett, Motley Crue, and Iggy Pop were the biggest bands ever, based on how many T-shirts they have in Hot Topic or whatever the UK equivalent is.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it, personally, I don't think like Van Halen for me are like Kiss. They are massive in the States. In the UK, not so much.
Yeah, yeah. To echo what you're saying, when Van Halen toured the UK in the mid '90s, they opened for Bon Jovi. Yeah, that would never happen here in the States for ego reasons and cash reasons. Van Halen opens
Yeah.
for no one.
Yeah, yeah, but um, I think I get it. There's something uniquely American about Van Halen, and that's not a compliment. That's not an insult. It's an observation. And the only other band I can think of, which is completely on a different scale, is Slayer. You know, bands that are uniquely American.
I'd
That
say Poison is like that too, because Poison was
I was being kind, but if you want to claim Poison, you know, fine, mate, fine. You want to claim that pile of shit, that's up to you.
well, well, with Poison, where I'm going with that is they're this US band that was doing arenas and still kind of do arenas, but in
Yeah, yeah,
the
okay,
UK,
you good point.
minimal European touring, minimal. Like they did Sweden Rock, I think 10 years ago. I remember seeing a DVD of a UK club tour they did in 94. I think they did one tour of Japan in 86. But Poison is not this phenomenon overseas. But in the US, when you talk about hair metal, Poison's like a top five ever band.
Do you know what? You are absolutely spot on because Poison must not have been that big because yours truly was a label mate of Poison's many, many years ago. Because I can't remember which album. Look What the Cat Dragged In was released on Music for Nations in the
Wow.
UK.
I didn't
Like,
know that.
yeah, exactly. Like an indie label. We were on the because at the time it was a source of like never mind embarrassment. You know, total mortification. Um, uh, but yeah, it was complete. They were completely overlooked by the majors to the extent as well. If they're on an indie in the UK, that means that the UK part of the label of the major that signed
Yeah.
Poison
It
in the
went,
States
yeah.
went, yeah, you're okay, we'll pass.
Yeah, so I one of my big obsessions is looking to see who's big in what countries,
Oh,
and
I
then
love that shit.
I love that stuff. Like when you find
Yeah,
Tom Petty is virtually unknown in a lot of the world, and here Tom Petty's like this Bob Dylan level songwriter, voices of generations,
yeah,
and and then you find out in Japan that the Ventures outsold the Beatles 2-1 in the 60s. And the Ventures, in some form, have even though they're down to, I think, one original member or zero original members, every year the Ventures tour Japan for 2 to 3 months. Average band goes over to Japan and plays like Tokyo, Osaka, maybe Nagoya, go home. And the Ventures are there for 2 to 3 months every
wow.
year. And you go like, so you're a 60s three-hit kind of band here, and then you were as big or bigger than the Beatles there. What?
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, a friend of mine used to play bass in a band called Lion's Heart that
Oh yeah,
and Steve Grimmett used to sing in them.
yeah.
And over here they play like club shows that would hold 250 people. Then they went over to Japan and they were paying 10,000 seat arenas.
Totally a common story. Spinal
Only,
Tap
but
in real life.
only Japan. The only fucking. I mean, obviously
No,
it's the age old phrase, isn't it? Oh, but we're big in Japan. But it turns out that kind of
yeah.
music industry joke is fucking true.
But then you have your anomalies like Manowar in Germany.
Oh,
Like,
do you know what? You beat me to it. I was gonna bring them up. Manowar in Greece. Jesus,
yeah,
they're bigger than like Madonna, Rihanna, and fucking Jay-Z put together.
yeah. I am endlessly obsessed with who's big in what countries. And where I am on Long Island, there's so many bands from Long Island that couldn't get signed here, moved to the UK, got signed, got huge, and no one from Long Island knew that they mattered. Like
Right.
Lemon Twigs, that happened with in the early 80s. That happened with the Stray Cats. They couldn't get signed,
Yeah.
so they moved to the UK. And you have the same kind of thing happen here, where you do have UK artists who move to New York or LA to make it. Cultural exchange programs, if you will.
Well, funnily enough, how weird is this? The guy who signed the guy signed Acid Rain to Music for Nations is the same man who signed Twisted Sister to Secret Records.
Okay, okay. So I'm going to connect the dots here. My first job out
Yeah.
of college was for Twisted's manager, Mark Puma. And
Ah, right.
there's so many everyone who worked on the early Twisted Sister stuff has had this like 40-year career in music. and is respected, and maybe that was their first or second gig. Yet Twisted Sister's this like joke band, yet Dee Snider's richer than everybody based on the songs being covered, like that Celine Dion song that he wrote and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, for me, and certainly in the UK, Twisted Sister have a fucking heap of respect. They're not viewed as a one hit wonder. They're not viewed as a hair metal
Right.
band. They are and I'll say it, top five, and I'm talking over 30 years of going to gigs and playing gigs. Top five in my live shows of all time
I believe it.
is a Twisted Sister show when I was a teenager, where I just came away going, well, that was fucking amazing. And I was seeing everyone back then, you know, one week it's Dio, one week it's
Yeah.
Alice Cooper, one week it's Twisted Sister, one week it's Slayer, you know, everybody. But Twisted Sister just absolutely, you know, just blew me away.
All because of Lemmy, right? Because Lemmy signed
Yeah,
off on them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. There it is. Well, kind of all because of Martin Hooker, because Martin Hooker signed them.
fair.
You know, and then yeah, Lemmy helped him out as well. But yeah, I mean, you know, for me, like I said, you know, a band with an incredible amount of cred. Um, and do you know what? It pisses me off that Twisted Sister don't get the respect they deserve in their homeland.
Uh, Again, Long Island band or Long Island-ish band, because some of the members were from here, and not super respected. Again, thought of as an '80s band or thought of as a flash in the pan. Yet they did have more than two hits. They did have more
Yeah.
than two songs that MTV played a lot. When they came back the first time in the early 2000s, like the venues were kind of big, then they overstayed their welcome, then they started, doing that 8-year farewell tour kind of stuff, like this is the last gig, no, this is the last gig, though this is they've fallen into a lot of the traps. But in Europe and elsewhere, Twisted Sisters are real respected band. They're more respected than Anthrax, they're more respected than all the metal greats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean, purely and simply, I mean, I remember as a kid when I was getting into metal, like people who were a bit older than me, which of course at the time feels like, you know, they're much older than you. Um,
When you're
like
18, 30 seems ancient.
Well, no, I mean, when you're 18, 21 seems ancient, you know, or when you're 16 and your sister's friends are 19, well, you know, they're men and you're a child, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
and the amount of them who had like, you know, Twisted Sister backpacks and oh yeah, sister, isn't it? Yeah, good band. Yeah, it's like they just everybody totally saw through how they looked, or just didn't give a shit how they looked. It was just, but that was, you know, yeah, let's face it, metal's always been, you know, I think incredibly accepting.
Yeah.
Ultimately it's about, are you any good live? Can you cut it? And have you got decent songs? And if you tick all those boxes, that's all that matters.
Well, not to make it like, hey, Darren shills his stuff, but the only two bands that I can think of that were famously a cover band and then transitioned into originals and made it in the hard rock space are Twisted Sister and Van Halen. In other words, yeah, I'm sure Rat was playing covers a little bit, and I'm sure Motley Crue played covers a little bit at the beginning, but we don't think of Rat or Motley Crue or Anthrax as cover bands. Cheap Trick, I know, had their cover band days. They predate all this, but it's Twisted Sister and Van Halen are the two cover bands made good.
And I mean, well, look, the story of Twisted Sister is fucking amazing, you know. And if you're listening, look, check out the documentary. I mean, I read Dee Schneider's autobiography when it came out because big fan, and there you go. I mean, this is the difference with Twisted Sister for me and everybody else. Is like Dee Schneider releases an autobiography. Oh, who wrote it? He fucking wrote it. That's who. Oh yeah, but who with? Nobody. He
Yeah,
wrote it with him. It's every word.
yeah.
It's like no one does that apart from Dee Schneider.
Very, very short list. I think David Lee Roth's book is credited to him, but he didn't really write it. He talked it and then they edited it down. What I
Yeah.
remember hearing, I think the comedian Jay Moore said this on his podcast. He said, when you write your book, if you don't want the co-author's name on it, you give them a certain amount of money to not put their name on it, as opposed to a traditional ghostwriting thing. It's just like,
Yeah.
Here's 10 grand. Your name's not on here. And they go, okay.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I would rather I'd rather earn the money, you know. I'd rather have the money and just go, yeah, fuck it, put somebody else's name on it as well. I'm absolutely fine with that.
How about this? I'll give you the free idea. This one just came to me. Say, I'll take the 10 grand, but on the second pressing, my name has to go on it. Meaning if it was
Ooh.
so successful, then your name's on it.
Yeah, that's I like I like your style there, mate. You should be a literary agent as well.
Oh man, literary agents. They're like used car salesmen with like high-end products.
Yeah, you know what? I kind of feel for agents in every industry, especially the sports industry, because they get such a bad rap. Over here in football, it's like, oh, agents. Oh, who needs a fucking agent? Oh, why do you? It's like, well, because maybe somebody who's good at playing football isn't that great at negotiating complex deals, you fucking idiots. I
Yeah.
mean, when you sell your house, do you just put a sign in the garden and go, hey, I'm selling my house. Anybody? Anyone? No,
Yeah,
you go get a fucking agent.
a lot of the worst deals ever have been signed by artists who thought that they were smarter than their manager and could represent themselves.
Or they were desperate, like George Michael, who signed his contract on the boot of a car in a pub car park. And it's like, I mean, for me, I personally, I think if you were dumb enough to do that in the first place, then you don't deserve. You deserve 30% of your royalties, and 70% goes to somebody who owned your contract. If you were stupid enough to do that in the first place, fine.
I
But
go I go both ways where I say if that person has that sizable of a stake, they might actually work 80 times harder in your career because they're incentivized. So in other words, you could have, I think the expression is you could have 100% of a grape or 10% of a watermelon, and that 10% of a watermelon is much bigger than that grape.
yeah,
So sometimes the crooks, I know if it's you, you'll feel differently, but sometimes those crooks actually made you more money
yeah,
by
but
being selfish.
well, there's the other percentage as well, which is, well, look, you can sign this management deal and I'll get you a record label. Yeah, but you're taking 60% of my earnings. And it's like, well, you can, I can, you can have 40% of your earnings or you can have 40% of nothing. What do you want? Because at the moment you have no future. So
Yeah,
40% of your future or 40% of nothing. And invariably, desperate times leads to desperate measures, and that's what people sign up for.
yeah. What one of the my mentors in the music business, who I still talk to from pretty often, who's quoted in the book, David Krebs, original co-manager of Aerosmith, AC/DC, Ted Nugent, all those bands, when you ask them, because they no longer represented by David, they'll go, "Oh, him and Steve Lieber swindled us," and then you go, no, not at all. They floated you all this cash. They
Yeah,
gave you rehearsal space. They negotiated better deals and renegotiated better deals. So maybe they owned stuff in the end, or they got paid long term, but
yeah,
they kept you afloat. And then if you look at the decline of Steven Tyler in the early 80s, you go, maybe they saved your life times 20 because no one would have taken a chance on Steven Tyler
yeah.
at
It's very much like any divorce. It gets messy. People say, well, they don't deserve that because they didn't do anything, and that party says, well, okay, if we didn't do
yeah,
anything, what about this? What about this? What about this? Well, you were away on tour. I was at home looking after the kids. What, you think that's nothing? And then it's the same thing. It's like, oh, they swindled us, and it's like, really? But they did this, 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 and this. And it's like, oh yeah, but we only got 60% of that deal. Again, they got you that deal. So, and you signed the contract, you agreed to it. It's very easy with hindsight to go, oh, yeah, we got ripped off. Yeah, maybe you didn't. And I always say this about hindsight is like hindsight is actually inaccurate because all you ever do is all you're left with is the decision
mm,
or the agree, whatever it is. What you don't remember are all of the other contributing factors at the time that led you to make that decision. You look back and you go, that was a bad decision. It's like, yeah, but you didn't make that. Now it is. Oh,
mm.
yeah. All these years later, but you've just forgotten all of the reasons that made you make that decision?
So, Howard, you mean it's like remembering the stories better than you do the events, like you said before?
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly like that. It is, it really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, so I think that bringing that back to Dave a little bit, in his
Yeah,
autobiography, he talks about being ripped off, by the early management and how they got their platinum record and these gold Van Halen necklaces. And guess who paid for it? We did. Yeah, but when Van Halen signed its deal, they weren't this touring band. They were basically a cover band who was big in Pasadena and LA, who had just been playing backyard parties within the last couple of years.
yeah,
So these people elevated you. They took you to Warner Brothers. Gene Simmons couldn't even get them a record deal. And Gene Simmons was kind of at the peak of his stroke, at his pull and his music industry influence. Granted, just about every band Kiss signed failed, but still, you know, he had the couple of chances did not work out for Van Halen. So to go, oh, and this manager screwed us, and this manager screwed us, and I think things worked out just fine, Dave. Just fine.
yeah. And also, it's an age old, and guess who's paying for it? We are. Yeah, yeah. That's how it works. Yeah, well done. Well,
Yeah. So
it's like people complaining about you know, record companies. I always say this, but it's an unpopular thing to say because I never had a problem with our label. They were great. We were only ever had one. They were wonderful. They were great. And when we left, they were still tens of thousands of pounds in the hole on us. And you always hear that same story, oh,
unrecouped.
we signed for them and like, they've taken all this money, blah. It's like, yeah, yeah. What about the other nine bands they signed on the same day as you that all failed and they spent the same amount of money on them as they did on you?
Yeah.
It's that's business.
Yeah. Another music industry mentor of mine from my management days. Occasionally, I still consult or help with a management project, but Jamie Kitman, he was the original manager of They Might Be Giants for 30 plus years, including the Birdhouse in Your Soul UK era run, which was huge. And he changed my mind big time on labels because when I came into it as a younger person, I was saying, well, let's make sure that they recoup on this so you get money. And he goes, no, get them to spend as much money as humanly possible on you because when they drop you, they'll have branded you better and gotten you out there more. You're always going to be unrecouped.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and also the narrative on labels is always the same thing. Ooh, labels evil. Oh, look, oh, they own that band's records forever, and it's like, well, they did pay for them.
Yeah,
I just pick a band out of the air. Anthrax, didn't spend $1 million of their own money making Among the Living. So
right.
is it surprising that they don't own the recordings? Well, no, not really.
So if you're reading my mind here, I'm going to get my book publisher to spend about $700,000 on this book,
Yeah,
and
absolutely, yeah.
we'll see just how unrecouped we can get.
Yeah, get as big an advance as you can. Get a massive fucking advance because that's the only money you're gonna see.
Most likely, that's the only money you're going to see. Hopefully, it's not cross collateralized against your publishing, your merchandise, that kind of stuff. Those are other advances that you could take out, which you'll never recoup. But there always seems to be, if you hold on long enough, there's always a new class action lawsuit and/or advance and/or rights reversion. You just have to hold on and not be grouchy and bitter about the whole thing. Like
Well,
you like Sound Exchange or something like that's another royalty check that artists do get directly.
things have come full circle for
Yeah.
me. I was approached about a year ago, if not more than that, um, with an offer to buy Acid Rain's entire catalog because we owned it. And I took their fucking hand off. I mean, hey, what? Just free money? Just come because I haven't had royalties on on this stuff. Like, 25 years. And all of a sudden someone says, we'll give you X thousand to buy your catalog and own it. Great. Yeah, sure. Have it. And because the whole thing, the whole streaming thing, I mean, I've got Excel spreadsheets that go on for fucking days. And at the
One
end,
cent, one cent,
yeah,
one
yeah,
cent.
yeah. And at the end, it's like you've earned 67 pence, and it just,
Totally speaking my language, and that is kind of the new normal. But then every now and then you go, have I done a memoir? Okay, we'll get 10,000 pounds as an advance for that, and we'll write that, and then we'll be unrecouped on that one. And merchandise advance, have we gotten that one? Okay, no, let's take that out. Let's take the you
yeah.
can play that and then all reinvest in yourself and use it to brand yourself further. So I'm so glad that you're on the same page with me, that a lot of the people who just naysay the industry, some of the greatest people you'll ever meet are the music industry lifers. Now, I'm not saying that's like 50% of the people. I'm not saying that's 30% of the people. But when you meet a music industry or entertainment industry lifer that you love, that is a friend for life. You
Yeah.
follow them from label to label, or publication to publication.
Well, it's funny you should say that because, I mean, at least three people who worked at the label that I was on, back in the day, um, I, I still speak to. I've had two of them on the podcast, and funnily
Yeah,
enough, sadly, very sadly, I was the only musician at Martin Hooker's funeral, who was obviously the man who signed Twisted Sister,
yeah,
and Metallica. There was a lovely eulogy read out by on Lars's behalf, who was gutted that he couldn't be there, and there was a eulogy read out on behalf of Dee Schneider as well.
yeah.
Um, and luckily for everybody, I didn't do one. But
I think you're a good speaker, just between
uh,
you and me. We'll keep that off the record, right,
yeah.
Howard? That I think you're great.
Oh, stop it. Um, but yeah. Oh, it's completely thrown me that. More compliments. Stop it.
Yeah, no compliments. We're British. The one man show of Howard H. Smith coming soon.
That's the one, yeah. So I mean, trying to track right. Look, one of the reasons that we're talking is that I I mentioned Billy Sheehan,
Mhm.
and my dealings slash non-dealings with Billy, who
Yeah,
clearly lives on a different timeline to everybody else. Let's I'll be kind and say he marches to the beat of his own drum. Unfortunately, it's out of time, but you know, all the same. Um, did you get to talk to Billy? Did you get to talk to people close to Dave? Did you speak to Steve Vai and
oh
because
yeah. So I interviewed Billy. It went super well. He shared it on his Facebook, and then I wrote, "Hey, do you want to read over the transcript? I'm going to put it in a book I'm writing about Dave." And he kind of lashed out at me in private messages, like, "You didn't say this for a book." I said, "Well, can you read this?" And he's like, "I'm too busy." I went, "Oh, oh, oh, okay. Sorry, Billy. Sorry. I don't know,
right.
but it's published, so it's. I was doing that out of courtesy." So I don't know if he's permanently mad at me, but it was a positive interview that he liked at the time. So he's in there. Steve Vai is in there. Uh, both Bissonette brothers
Oh
from that
wow, that was going to
era.
be my next question. Yeah, because I mean, like, um Eat 'em and Smile for me, I remember reading a review in Kerrang and I thought, yeah, they've absolutely nailed that. It's the best Van Halen album they never made.
I'm with you. And also from that era, Jesse Harms, who played keyboard, who was offered the gig before Brett Tuggle spoke with him. Sammy Figueroa, who played percussion on a couple of songs on Eat 'em and Smile, also in there. From the music videos, Durga McBroom, she's in the intro in the convenience store, and
Awesome.
Dave Jellison, who was a Dave collaborator in that, who was also in late Van Halen's crew, late like the towards the end before Dave was gone. He went from Diver Down until pre-production on Skyscraper. So I spoke to a lot of people from that, and you know, bless you for being you, of course. And then I mean, like each album to album, I spoke to whether it's musicians or creative people or whoever was managing, there's representation of every single era. Now, of course, there's different Dave people who are under non-disclosures, who don't talk, who don't want to talk. There's other people he fired in a nice, not nice way and never want to talk about him again. But I really represent everything. So there's stuff that happened in 2022 in the book, every
Right. Okay.
era of Dave. The story of how the radio show, the rise and fall of the radio show, these Vegas residencies, including the Vegas residency that didn't happen, that was supposed to happen in '04. I spoke to them all for better and for worse. A lot of people are tired of me.
I just have this kind of not very well researched. Well, clearly not, given
Well,
your
actually, can I
given it.
can I pause you there
Yeah.
because I have to hop on that call in 2 minutes. I can come back in like 30 minutes if you
Right.
want.
No. Look, what I was going to say is, there we go. I'm just going to pause this.